Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are again for another Tuesday talk. Today, as promised, our guest is Dr. Gary Zachariah. He is a clinical psychologist who is local to us in the Hartford area at Psychological Health Associates, someone that I've known for quite a long time. And as we have been going through the pandemic, someone who I have had to ask a lot of questions of myself, just in terms of what people are going through. So I thought it would be helpful today to have him join us. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to reach out to people.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. And especially, I think this one seems to be a very timely topic in terms of we're heading into summer. We've just had all these months. We're heading into phase two, or we're in phase two, and things are changing again. I think we had sort of the big change of us all coming home. And then it was the big change of starting to reopen. And now that schools are closing and we have graduations and end of year ceremonies. And I think that things are definitely shifting again. I've noticed that in our own house. And I thought that perhaps there were other people who would find it helpful to have a conversation about that.
Sure. Absolutely. I think we've all had quarantine fatigue. And as I've told you, or anybody who wants to listen, there was no graduate school class on COVID-19. So we're all going through this together and transitioning together. And I just worry that people are just exhausted emotionally and fatigued and not really listening to other people. I think we're not listening to our spouses, our children, our friends. And I really think now's the time, especially with the sense of loss. We've eighth graders have lost the eighth grade graduation. High school seniors have lost the high school, the high school graduation, college graduates, and lots of loss going on, but probably not a lot of talking because everybody is fatigued, especially now going into these new phases. I really worry about that people aren't paying attention to the protocols by the CDC because people are just exhausted.
I think we are definitely seeing that. I know that we've seen it locally, even what I would say anecdotally, photos all over Facebook of various ceremonies, graduations, graduation parties. I think there are some people who are observing very closely, and there are some people who are not observing at all. And I think that, I would say there are certainly people who started this maybe having an issue with, I don't want to say being germ phobic, but certainly being more aware of germs than other people. I think now we are all more aware of germs, of all the surfaces that we touch, of how many times we touch our face in a day, in an hour, how we handle things in terms of, cleanliness, et cetera, et cetera. What are some of the things that perhaps you've seen in terms of helping people go from the relative safety of their own homes now entering back into the world? What are some of the things that you're suggesting or telling folks in terms of managing some of that?
The most important thing first is just to be open with your feelings. I think, as you said, we're all having our own germ issues. And I think if we make sure to talk about them, I think that's extremely important. Because if we don't talk about them and get them out, then it's increasing the anxiety within us. And then I think everybody has to do things with their own comfort level. I mean, families are making decisions, friends are making decisions. And I would simply say, just make sure when you go out to deal with your anxiety, to do what I would tell anybody to deal with anxiety. You need to get out a lot and exercise a lot and watch funny YouTube videos and do things to manage your anxiety, because it is when you go out there and everybody's wearing a mask, God willing, everybody's wearing a mask, it can be frightening. And I think it's managing your anxiety.
Well, and I think that that's true, because the recommendations still are that we maintain that 6-foot distance, that we are having our masks on in public places. I've been a couple places myself in the last week where I've left because it was obvious that there was not a lot of, I don't want to use the word control necessarily, but there was not a lot of observance of the fact that the rules still are what the rules are. So I think that, the idea of getting outside and that sort of thing, how does routine play into that? Because that's that's also something that I know I've personally noticed over the last few months, the importance of routine, because we were all so out of routine. And I think every single person I've talked to has said they have lost some track of time, some track of the day of the week, that sort of thing. How does routine play into helping to manage the anxiety?
Sure, that's a great question. Routine is easy, essential. It's having structure of our day. We should get up around the same time we've always gotten up in our work day. We should eat our breakfast and do things as structured as we were before we were quarantined, and because structure helps us feel more comfortable, and it gives us boundaries, it forces us to go forward. And when we don't have structure, that's when we get more anxious. So we should go to bed at the same time. We should do as much as we can before all this Twilight Zone episode hit.
That's definitely a good way of putting it, because that is what it
Yes.
feels like for those of us who get the reference. It's definitely that is what it feels like for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I would also say that, something that I've seen in terms of, when you're talking about that, understanding the fatigue, I've definitely noticed, or my friends have shared with me, they have seen sort of in the last few days, especially, I guess it sort of changes depending on the age of the kids. I definitely have noticed with friends that their high school age children, as we're getting to this end, even if they're not graduating, that there seems to be a psychological toll really on the kids at this point, because there's no real closure, I think, to the school year in some ways. I mean, I think the schools have done their best in terms of trying to provide opportunities, whether it's a parade or a drive by something, or the teacher, dropping something off at the house. But what are the things maybe parents should be looking for in terms of concerns around this end of school?
Sure. Again, to me, you bring up a very great point. I mean, for all of us, especially our children, there has been a sense of loss. I mean, we've lost connection. We've lost months of those connections, and going forward, no matter what age, but especially with children. And so, to me, the things to look at is: are our children becoming more withdrawn? Are they suddenly becoming more anxious? Are they becoming more needy? And I think, although we're all fatigued as parents, it's our responsibility to really give extra attention to our children, to really listen to our children more, and ask how they're doing. And it doesn't say, "Hey, Johnny, how are you doing?" But give a reflective statement like, "Johnny, it must be very different for you in not ending the school year in the way you've ended it before," or "It must be overwhelming for you not to have seen your friends for a while, or hurt you." So I wouldn't ask the question. I would give a reflective statement, and then that increases the probability of them talking. And if they don't talk once, I wouldn't stop. I would, every couple of days, I would check in with your children.
Especially, I think, with teenagers, that's true, because we all know they're not always necessarily forthcoming, no matter how good your relationship is with them. It is a challenge to get them to talk about, any of it. And I almost wonder, would it also be helpful if maybe sharing, within reason, some of the things that you're experiencing yourself as a parent in regard to your own friendships or your own sort of where you are with the fatigue? Is that helpful to them, do you
I
think?
I think that's another very essential piece here, because the more we normalize our feelings for our young adults and children, the more they're going to feel like it's okay to talk. So the more we share, again, the universal thing about this is we've all been going through it, myself included. So it's extremely important to share as much as you can, depending on the age of the child, whatever is age appropriate that you feel, to sharing your feelings. And yeah, I'm scared. I'm scared to go out, and I've told my own adult children that, because it could be different and scary. And it's, the more we normalize those feelings, the more they're going to feel like it's okay. If your child sees you like, ah, da, 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 everything's great, no worries, no, then they're going to think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And the answer is nothing. But if you don't normalize those feelings, then your child or children are going to think there's something wrong with them.
I think that's a really important point, especially in light of you may be feeling okay, but that doesn't mean that your child is. And it's one of those moments where you have to make sure that you are sort of digging in and doing the work to see where they are on the spectrum of okay. And I guess I would also say, when you talk about children withdrawing, I think like that's an easy one somewhat for teenagers in terms of like if they're spending all their time in their room or they're suddenly acting a certain way that's out of character. But I guess for younger children, sort of the more elementary set, what does that look like? Because some parents may not be connecting the dots on what it might look like at that age.
I think it's important to, if your child is doing things out of character, for a younger child, if they're suddenly more needy, if they're acting out more, if they're sneaking things, if they're eating more, eating less, just basic daily function things. If your parental radar is going off like there's something wrong, I think it's most important to look at those things.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So I would also say, in terms of, are there steps to, we talked a little bit about the fear of going out. Are there any kind of suggestions or steps to when the family makes the decision that they are going to go out, maybe eat it outdoors at a restaurant, or maybe even just go for a hike or whatever it is, especially if they haven't been doing sort of those outdoor things? Are there any strategies maybe for an anxious child that is, more phobic about COVID to sort of work through both maybe before you leave the house and then after you get to where you're going? Is there something that parents can be sort of thinking ahead on in terms of that transition?
Sure. To me, it is everybody whoever's going, getting in the group the day before and really talking about everybody's feelings. I know I keep referencing that, but I just think it's so important. It's like the core part of dealing with any emotional issue is validating people's feelings. And so to me, but you're doing it as a unit, and everybody should have a say. And so the day before, that's what I would do, and then the night, the morning of, before I went out as a group, whatever we're doing, I would get everybody to take a walk around the block just to get everybody moving, get pieces moving.
Yeah.
And then I would go and do whatever activity. And then I would do some type of the similar walk on the way back once you're back. And then I would debrief after and just say, hey, how did that feel? And talk about it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a process of talking and action.
Well, and I think that in some families, that's probably more something they do on a regular basis than others. But I also think that maybe this time provides us an opportunity because we have had, it's in some ways we've had so much time. In some ways we haven't had more time. As a parent who had to work from home, obviously campaigning, plus being, an assistant teacher to a 10-year-old, and then just helping my older two children navigate. I think that it's been sort of interesting to have at our house. It's been a lot more discussions, I think. But I love that you're saying that, even if that's not your norm, this is an opportunity to have that. And maybe that helps build future relationship work too.
And connections. And I will say, I just think that it's important for parents to step it up. Now's the time to really be paying extra attention to our children. I mean, we're fatigued, overwhelmed by our own jobs, overwhelmed when and how to go out. And maybe our friends are doing this and certain friends are doing that. And all these transitions and decisions and all these things as parents that we have to process. But we can't forget about the children. We can't forget about the children's feelings and talking about talking to the children. and really understanding that they're scared. When my daughters watch this sometime this afternoon, when I send them the link, that I'm going to say this, and they'll know it's true. Our daughters are 25, and as of a week from today, almost 27. But we've seen them reach out to us more, even though we already talk to them every day. They are reaching out to us more. They are looking for us still as their parents to validate their feelings, to talk with them, to be there for them, to normalize the abnormal that's going on. So to me, it's extremely important to really dialogue with our children, no matter what age.
So, and that brings us to, wholeheartedly agree with all of that. But let's be honest, the parents are tired. Like you said, we're all experiencing this quarantine fatigue. Self-care has been a, buzzword for a while now. And I think that the challenge is, for some people, self-care looks one way. So for other people, self-care looks another way. There are a lot of people who don't have time for self-care, or they think they don't have time for self-care. There's an interesting app called the Shine app that really addresses the fact that women of color especially really struggle with finding that self-care moment for themselves. And so I guess what I would ask is, what kinds of things, so that we are readily available and, present for our children, what kinds of self-care things, what does it look like? Or what should we be doing with our own emotions, perhaps with our spouses, or if we don't have a spouse, what are the kinds of things as adults that we should be, keeping track of, I guess, so that we're present and available for our children?
Sure. I think connecting with our spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends. I know a lot of people do Zoom happy hours and Zoom connections. As a lot of people, I think it's important to exercise, even if it's 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day goes a long way. And to what you're saying is, when you say people absolutely are overwhelmed and like, oh, I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
To me, that is true perceptually, but I think people need to breathe. Mm-hmm. And I think people should breathe every hour. Just breathe. And when you breathe and get a little perspective, that's essential for managing our own care. And then we'll be able to find a little bit of that time. 10 minutes a day goes a long way. In between my therapy sessions, I'll try to find a funny YouTube video, and there's a lot of quarantine parodies, and I'll send them to my beautiful wife and children, and I absolutely.
That makes sense. And it's interesting. I know that in our house, America's Funniest Home Videos have made a comeback, mostly because we happen to have Disney Plus and they're available, but you can certainly find clips on YouTube and other places. And I think that just that laughing together, or, even just taking that minute to laugh, certainly. For me, I know it definitely is that taking that time to breathe. And so, some of these things I think you have to schedule. I mean, it seems crazy to think that you would have to schedule 10 minutes to walk around your block 3 times, but you do, because otherwise, if you don't get in that routine, it's so easy to just let it go by the wayside. And I have to say, on my own journey, there's been a lot of, up and down in our family's journey, and I hear it from friends all the time. So I really value, when you're saying taking those minutes. It's important.
And that goes back to structure. And look, this all hit us, and we were all just for shits. We just didn't have any idea what was going on. But now that we had time to breathe, I think that's why this conversation is important, because now we can now more center ourselves and more structure ourselves and do more of those core things, to listen to ourselves, listen to our significant others, listen to our children, listen to our friends. If you feel like your friend is going down, give them some extra TLC. It takes all of 5 seconds to send a text message just checking on you. But the person getting that text message, right?
Right.
That means so much to them. So it's a little goes a long way. Breathing goes a long way.
We did get a couple questions ahead of time. One of them was,
Sure.
what do I tell my teenager when they say, well, everybody else is going out and everybody else is getting to go out without a mask? And, what about that? What are some sage words?
Sure. I'm smiling because my mom never sees this. Her big comment was, well, I'm not everybody else's parent.
Mhm.
I'm your parent. And all kidding aside from my adolescence, I think that's what you have to say is, you know, I know Johnny is going out and Suzanne is going out, and you know, we're your parents. We love you, and we're doing what we think is best. How do we know if we're right or wrong? We don't, but we're just showing, giving it our best shot. But before that, I would reflect upon their feelings. I would say that must suck. Excuse me. That must be frustrating.
Mhm.
That must be over. So I would reflect the feelings.
Mhm.
Okay, and then say, but we're just doing it differently. They may be right. We may be overprotective, but that's who we are. We're doing what we think is right. But I would reflect the feelings first. And I apologize about that brief indiscretion. Yes,
Minor indiscretion, minor
yes,
indiscretion. So
yes,
another
yes, yes.
other regarding other topics, certainly as we go through this, but similar, things have drastically changed in the last few weeks with the Black Lives Matter protests, with the killing of multiple unarmed Black men. Not that that is a new thing, but that it is an ongoing thing. I think, though, for the first time for many parents, this is the first time that they are approaching conversations with their children about race at all. I think it's a time when they are approaching conversations with their children about race differently. And so I'm wondering what some of your thoughts are on, because it can be uncomfortable for parents. And then certainly children who are watching the news or exposed to media more now than they ever have been, even because it's very difficult for parents to. I remember we would just watch the nightly news, but now, news is everywhere all the time, whether it's
Right.
Snapchat or, so
Mhm.
what are some ways for parents to be able to talk to their children about these topics, maybe make talking about it less scary for the parents, maybe, what are things that sort of help put this in a space that parents are able to go forward and talk about it?
Sure. I think, I mean, again, obviously, you need to think about the age of the child, but I think, given that into consideration, I'm all about being real, and I
Yep.
would say we should have been talking to you about this before. These are uncomfortable topics. Uh, that's part of the issue, is that we haven't talked about these things that we should have, because they are uncomfortable. But
Right.
it's our parental moral obligation going forward to have these difficult conversations with you. And so I would own it, and I would say, yeah, these are difficult conversations, and humbly, we should have been talking about these before, and for that, shame on us. But then again, you're being real with your children. The way I do my therapy, the more real that I am, the more credible that I am. The
Hmm.
more credible that I am, the greater the likelihood that people are going to listen to me. And that's always been my goal as a husband, father, therapist.
That honesty really matters. And I think that even, like you said, it's sort of almost like a humbling to say, we screwed up. This should have been a conversation all throughout. And for some families, I think that, the embarrassment, there is an embarrassment when you're white of not pointing out race or not discussing race or, not calling attention to the difference between me and someone else. That's sort of been the disconnect. But I think when you say about the authenticity and the honesty, certainly that's critical. And I have found myself saying the things that are the hardest to explain to myself are the things that are the hardest to explain to my kids, and always have been, especially around topics like injustice. Because if you can't explain it to yourself and then you try to explain it to a child, you realize that it really is, something's really wrong.
Absolutely.
So,
but to me, that's part of the humbling process. And to me, again, to make sure it's age appropriate. But to me, the more we humble ourselves in general, but the more we humble ourselves in discussing these topics with our children, the more they're going to carry forward. And that's our ultimate goal, right? Because we're empowering them to carry forward. So if we can't have real conversations with them, then that decreases the likelihood of things going forward. And then all the things that are going on now become for naught.
absolutely. And we certainly don't want that to happen. So
No.
the other thing I would say is, there's been a lot of discussion about listening, and whether it's listening to Black people. You've mentioned today multiple times about listening to our children. What are some active listening strategies that maybe you employ? I mean, you do, your whole career is listening. So
Yes.
I think that, a lot of people, they're just waiting till the other person finishes so they can give their thought, or they're distracted by technology and 50 other things. And so their minds are elsewhere, making a grocery list or thinking about the problem at work. What are some active listening strategies that we can all be employing, both as we're, talking to our children and listening, and as we're moving throughout the world to get more educated and listening?
There's psychological secrets, I'm telling. No, but no, there's no secrets, Adventure. There's no secrets, because therapy is about communication. So there are key parts of listening. Okay, let's go to body language. Okay, like in this talk, I'm not sitting way back here. I'm a little bit closer to the camera. I'm leaning in. I'm giving good eye contact. My face is a little forward. That's one of the most basic parts, but that already puts people less defensive and gives people a chance to open up. Then I'll call it reflective listening. Okay, so you try to guess somebody's emotion, like, oh, that must be scary. Oh, that must be sad. Oh, you must feel horror. You relax some emotion. Oh, you must be about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the key part is, okay, is that even if you're wrong in your guess, okay, even if you're very wrong in your guess, okay, now you're telling the person that you're trying to pay attention to them. So now you're disarming them, their emotional defensiveness, and you are absolutely giving them a greater chance to talk to you.
Wow, those are very great tips.
I think. Does that, hopefully I didn't go too fast?
No. I think that's great. And certainly, people can watch this back after. If anybody watching has questions, they're also welcome to put those in the comments. We do, when we do these Tuesday talks, we have someone monitoring. So that way we can make sure that if anybody has questions, that we do get to them. So I'm trying to think in terms of, we're heading into summer. Again, you mentioned structure and routine. I think, we're going to see a big change again. There's a lot of summer camps that have canceled. And I just don't know if there's anything specific around summer that you might want to address, or just remind people, as we're heading into summer, because we have probably a good 60 days before we really are heading back to school and college. And even those decisions are going to be, really challenging.
Sure. To me, this brings this conversation full circle, because we're all fatigued, can be overwhelmed. We're anxious about how to go to phase 2, phase 3 for our own selves, for our own families. It would be very easy to let our children go on screens. Johnny's on the screen for 2 hours. No, three, no big deal. Screens depersonalize people. It disconnects people, and they're very emotionally not healthy. So it's very important to try to pull our children off the screens as much as we can. And some of video games, yes, they're socializing. Yes, they're talking to other people. They're talking to their friends. Of course, some of their friends are in California or New Zealand, but they're talking to their friends. But the most it's very important to if you're going to let our children use screens an hour a day, get them outside, take walks, get a pool, go into a pool. I built a little, as my wife would call an adult baby pool. But do something. It's just be active and try your best to get outside, or even when you're inside, play games and play card games. I've lost numerous rounds of gin in the last 3 months. So it's just very, very important to do.
Well, and it's interesting because I think some of the things that you're talking about, it's not just with your kids, it's also with your spouse. You must be psychic, because as you were starting to talk about screens, we'd actually gotten a question about screen balance this summer, because I know in our house, it's the same thing. And it's not even just the screen balance for the kids. I think it's the screen balance for the adults. When you talk about the listening, the actually, when somebody asks me a question and they're still on their phone, I know they're not listening, and I'm sure they feel the same way about me. So I think that, but obviously, your daughters are grown, you're playing cards with your wife, and that's, something. I think that there's been a lot of that lost with the kids home all the time, not being able to go out to dinner. Trying to create a date night is certainly a challenge. So I like that you brought up the part also about just, even the playing games, because it's not just with the kids, it's the spouses too. So it's helpful. So thank you for that. I really appreciate
Absolutely. And I lost part of that. Oh, that's okay. I lost part of that because your transmission went out. But I think fondest memories growing up was when we had a thunderstorm that knocked out all the power. So my brother and I, we would play gin, and I used to really enjoy those times. And so it's extremely just important to be able just to try for all of us, correct, to stay away from those screens.
Yeah. Great for mental health to be out and about. So at this point, I think we're going to wrap up, because I think we have exhausted our questions, but I thank you so much for your time today.
Oh my God. I thank you for having me here.
Yes. And I think that all of the tips, if people didn't have a chance to watch it live, certainly there's a lot here for people to digest and to think about. Both, I look at it this way: whatever's happened has happened, but we can always move forward from where we are and know better, do better. So with all of these helpful ideas and tips and things, it'll really help us move forward in expressing our own feelings, helping our children express theirs, and to communicate better.
Sure. Can I say one more thing real quick to add to that? Sure.
Yep.
So my view of life is a maze. And often we go down the right path, and sometimes we don't go down the right path. I don't like the word wrong. Okay. But it's always about learning. So, this is all new to us. So no matter what we've done the last 3 months, we can still learn. But we can only learn if we have our head up and not beating ourselves up. Oh, 2 months ago when this began, I should have done this. Okay, but you didn't do that, but that's okay, because that's learning, and that's what we all do. And so as long as we learn through the process, that's key. So thank you for letting me add that one more thing on.
No, absolutely. And I think that that's really important to remember, because there is a chance that this could be happening again, potentially in the fall. And so perhaps the routines and things that we set up now, especially the communication, with whoever we're living with, and or, keeping track of friends outside the house who may not be living with family. I think that it's important that we have that in place for moving forward. So very good.
Absolutely.
So
I thank you for your time.
thank you so much. Thank you very
Okay.
much. And at this point, we're going to log off. So thanks everybody for watching, and certainly share it with your friends. Thanks.
Okay.
Have a great
Be
day.
well. Okay, bye.